In this video, I'm going to show you how I painted this sci-fi Gothic Grimdark locomotive and the flatbed wagons that go with it. This is a great model which we found on MyMiniFactory. It's by a seller called Tesseract Tomb, and I'm going to pop a link to this model in the description of the movie. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up or subscribe or both. And if you've got any questions, please feel free to pop them in the comments. What I find, because this has been FDM printed and I've stuck it all together, what I find with FDM prints is that you get little grooves, which are the laminations of the FDM, and I like to try and disguise those a little bit. So I'm going to show you how I do that, then we'll move on to priming and the next stage. So what I tend to do is get some PVA. I've got some in a pot just here. Okay, and I'm going to liberally douse the model in PVA and water. And what we're looking to do is get this into the grungy areas of the locomotive that the mechanics can't get to so easily. So I'm not taking much care here. There's no need really. And then what we're going to do is we're going to get the sweepings from the floor where I did some carpentry recently, and I'm going to show you what that looks like. It looks something like that. All right, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to scatter that into the places where I've just put the PVA. And this can end up being a little bit too thick at times. So what I then do is I'm going to wipe it off with a bit of this roll here. What this tends to do is this tends to give it some extra texture, which makes it feel a bit more real. So I'm on the last wagon. Let's carry on. Don't put too much PVA and water. Don't put too little. Just the right amount. You'll know what the right amount is when you've done it a few times. Finish coating this end of the buffer. So what we're trying to do with this effect is simulate the effect of either grease that's collected loads of dirt, or perhaps rust that has been able to accumulate over time. What you tend to find is that the wagons will be in a far worse state than the locomotive, because the locomotive gets looked after a little bit better. It's actually got to pull the train. The wagons tend to get neglected. Now at this stage you might be thinking to yourself, well, there's still a lot of bits on there, but when this is dried, we're going to come back to this with some sandpaper, possibly a brush, and thin that effect down a little bit more. As you can see, it's quite crusty. So I'm going to put this to one side. I'm going to go and have lunch now, and when I come back, I'm hoping this lot will be dry, ready for the next stage. Okay, the PVA's dried now. It can take a long time if you put a lot of PVA on like I did, unless you warm it up. So I've used a hairdryer. If you're going to do that, you need to be careful that you don't melt your model. Okay, as you can see, in places there's probably a little bit too much of this grunge in there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take some of this off and smooth it out a little bit. So I'm going to use some 120 grit paper. It's actually some old 120 grit paper, so it's not very fierce. And I'm just going to gently start to work into the model, and just take some of the grunge. And here we go. So it can be a bit awkward. Work it in. Just take the take the sawdust and the grunge back a little bit. It's also going to add some patina to the cleanness of the FDM. It's going to add some scratches, and there'll be plenty of areas where I can't get properly. So what I'm going to do where I can't get properly is I'm going to take this stiff brush and I'm going to put the stiff brush over it, and that's going to take some of it off as well. So what you're going to end up with is the grunge in the recesses, which is kind of what I wanted, and the exterior surfaces, the upper surfaces of the locomotive are going to be a lot smoother, and it's now starting to look like grease that's full of dirt rather than just simply sawdust stuck onto a train model. So now that I've got most of the larger pieces off, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a smoother paper. This time it's a 240. I'm going to do the same thing again and just smooth everything down a little bit further. We're just finishing the last wagon. You'll notice I'm not using a sanding block with the paper. That's so I can bend it and get it into the nooks and crannies. In actual fact, as the paper ages, it gets a lot easier to do. So what I'm trying to do is take off all the sharp edges, for example, around the buffers here and on this running gear, on the edges of the wagon here. And I'm going to take the brush again, just give it another brush down. As you can see, it's still pretty grungy, but there's a lot less on there than when we started. So now I'm going to do the same again, only this time I'm going to use 400. I'm going to start on the locomotive, which, as you can see, is starting to look a lot cleaner, and this is going to be a lot quicker than the last two applications of paper, because really we're just polishing what's there now and giving it a last dust off before we do some priming. So I'm going to go ahead and prime the locomotive now. As you can see from the treatment we just did with the sandpaper and the brush, it's ready to go, it's ready to prime. So I'm just going to pop all these down. I'm going to show you what I'm going to prime it with. So I've got a whole range of paint here. Primer, I got the matte black primer I got here at my local garage. Surface primer and the Rust-Oleum Painter's Touch I got from the hardware store. This is from the model shop, and then I'm going to show you what I'm going to do with this metallic at the end. So let's get into it. So I'm doing this outdoors because, as you know, the fumes from this stuff can be pretty nasty. So always spray outdoors or spray in the garage. If it's raining, give yourself plenty of ventilation. So when I'm priming something like this, I prefer to start with everything flipped upside down so I can hit the underneath first. So I've flipped it all over now. Gonna hit the top sides of it all. So I've finished the black. It's still not quite dry. I'm a very impatient painter, so I'm going to go straight on with some rust colour now. Now I'm going to give this quite a light dusting. We don't need to put too much. We used quite a bit of black, but we're not going to use much of any other colour. So the whole thing's looking a little bit red rust now. I'm now going to pop a little bit of this brown colour to tone some of the rust down a little bit. Here's my brother Richard, he's just turned up. Going to get him to say a few words about what we're painting here. What do you think, Richard?
Hi, so the train's coming along really well. Been a great bit of work done to create the grunge effect. So sawdust, PVA to create that oil and grease kind of look to it. And that looks really, really smart. The general painting is looking really, really tip top. What we want to create though is some areas of additional color where we're going to start to use water slide transfers. And for instance, I've got one of these old this is going back a few years, transfer sheet, and the idea being that we can use these numbers, whether one of these or some of these old numbers, on the train to build up the layers and to the detailing on the actual engine itself.
We've put a little bit of rust onto the train now. What I want to do is put a bit of variety of colour in there, because if you look at the real world, it's never all one colour. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a bit of this Death Guard green, and then we're going to put a bit of this metallic on top. Okay, I'm going to talk to you about why we're going to put that metallic on. But I'm just going to hit this with a couple of little bits of Death Guard green, just to take the edge off the orange. Okay, now when we finish this, we're going to put what's called a chip coat on, and to make that chip coat work properly, we're going to need to make these things look like they are made of metal but gone rusty. And to give it that illusion of metal, I'm just going to pop a little bit of this on top. And when I use my chip coat, you're going to see how this brings it to life. So now we've got our metallic effect on there. Just wanted to show you a bit of detail. This is what it's looking like. So what I'm doing now is I'm just taking some of the edge off the brighter rust with a little bit of extra black spray. I just felt some of the colour was a bit too vivid, and I wanted to tone it down before we start the chip coat. As you can see, the locomotive and the wagons are in a state where they look a little bit like rusty metal. Now, to enhance that illusion, we're going to put some other colours on this. Before we put the other colours on, we're going to put what I call, and what I think is known as, a chip coat on. We're going to use latex with a sponge and flicked on to mask this colour. So when we spray our next colour on, we can peel that off. And if we put markings on, if we put hazard stripes or panels where we're going to maybe put some of the decals, what it will do is it'll chip through the colour and make it look very, very authentically weathered. Here's the locomotive. What I've got is Winsor & Newton masking fluid. and an old toothbrush. And all I'm going to do is flick. So what we're looking for when we do this technique is a variety of flicked paint like this and sponged areas, and something I've noticed when I'm using this technique is that more is more rather than less is more. You can afford to go a bit over the top with this and you're still going to find that things are going to turn out well. And if it doesn't, you can always carry on painting once you've taken the chip coat off. There's no harm in that. I'm not concerned about this area where I've ended up with a great big chunk of latex. I can just wipe some of that. I'm actually going to add a bit more. So I've also got some thickened latex here as well, which I'm going to use to add some areas alongside my my flicked pieces. Just try and give you an idea of how much I've put on the side of the locomotive there. It's well peppered. Okay, we're going to put another process and a bit more colour onto the wagons now. So the top of the wagon, I want to do it a kind of a dark, a cool dark grey colour, and I want to do this before I start masking hazard stripes around the edge, because I want to do this without affecting the chip coat at this stage. As you can see, the chip coat's still drying, but that's okay. This can go on top of a still wet coat. So we're going to put this on. So we don't need too much of this. It's just to give an effect, so we're not just steel on the top. That's good enough. Okay. Now that we've got the grey on the top of the wagons, I've masked that. I want that to stay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add a bit more darker detail using the airbrush around the running gear. Then I'm going to mask that and we're going to carry on the paint process. I am using this one, Citadel Abaddon Black Air. It's a little bit thick, it's old paint, so I'm running it with some flow improver. And all I'm doing is looking at the areas that are sunk back, and I'm adding just some dark. Really focused on the running gear. And it doesn't need much, and this is not going to take long. So that's one done, which I started earlier. Now I'm going to get into the next one. You can see the difference between the two sides. This side's had the black, this hasn't had it yet. Hope you can see the difference. Hard to show on film, I think. Right, it's starting to take shape. So while we're loaded up with black, I'm going to take a look at the locomotive. I'm going to put a bit more low lighting on that. especially focused on the lower half, the lower side of the locomotive. Remember, we've got the chip coat on this now, so some of this black's not going to stay. So it'll start to add layers of grime and detail. So what I'm making sure is that all the industrial components of the locomotive and the wagons are finished as I want them, because very soon I'm going to mask this. I'm going to start to put some of the colour on it and some places, locations where we can put those decals. Making sure I get some low lights in between these cylinders on the side of the locomotive. Okay, hard to see the change, but everything's looking a little bit darker now. So now what I'm doing is I'm masking the running gear of the wagons so that when I spray the next effect, the running gear stays as it is. That's the bit we just low lighted with the black. I want to keep that as it is. So I'm just using any old low tack masking tape here, and it's a right faff and it has to be done. Just tuck that in with the scalpel. There we go. Bit on here. So again, I'm just tucking it behind with the scalpel, making it easier for myself. And that's another wagon done. So that's 3 down, 2 to go. So I've put a bit of masking on the running gear for the locomotive, and likewise the wagons. Next step, put a bit of colour on these cylinders on the locomotive. Right, let me load the airbrush up and we'll carry on. A little bit of typhoon ash, a little bit of dryad bark, all mixed up in the pot, straight in, no messing. So now I'm going to paint the cylinders on the locomotive. Here we go. So the idea is to be quite accurate with the airbrush at this stage, so I haven't got much of the rest of the locomotive masked up. So I'm trying to hit my targets. Obviously with my chip coat on there, fair bit of this is going to come off, but this is all important, giving it a bit of variety. Let's keep going. It needs a little bit more. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. I'm going to mask that start the next stage. The next colour we're going to put on is for the engineering areas of the wagons. So for example, this little area here where something's going on with the brakes or the way the wagon works, and this area at the back. So I want to tint it up with a little bit of some sort of grey-green colour. And I've got this one, and it's called Sage, and it's lovely, and it does the job every time. So let me load the airbrush up. Again, to start with, tiny little bit of this, in it goes, and then a tiny little bit of the Sage. The Sage, unfortunately, is a little bit thick because it's old. So that's why I put the flow improver in it first, and then mix it up with a brush, and we're ready to go. So I'll put the lid on the airbrush and we'll get started. Okay, lid on. To start with, tiny spray on the board here just to see what's coming out. Yep, this looks good. It's nearly white. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're just going to tint up this area. We're not going to do much. So as you can see, we're not putting too much on. That's all we need. Tiny little bit. That's all we want. Okay, so I'm going to do that on all 5 wagons now. We've got the locomotive mast here, where we painted the cylinders earlier. We're now going to paint some of the engineering green on some of the lower parts of the locomotive. So this colour's a bit temperamental, it's a bit thick, it's a bit too thick for the airbrush, and I didn't hit it with enough flow or at the right time anyway. You can see all the spatters going on there, and that's what I consider a happy accident. It's making a right mess, but it's making the sort of mess that I want to see. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop a little bit of this colour around the back of the cab of the locomotive before I get into it with a better colour. Okay, to finish this part of the locomotive off, I've masked it up even further. And what I want to do now is hit it with a little bit of the Death Guard green, this Citadel colour. And I'm just going to touch it from above like that. Okay. And now I'm going to do the cabin at the rear, same thing. On this side. Sorry you can't see that. I think the cab at the back's fine. See, we've just missed it there. So we'll just give that a tiny bit more. There we go. Okay, I think I'm pretty happy with that now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to mix something up in the airbrush. I'm going to bring that colour to life a little bit more. I've loaded the airbrush up, this time, well again, with the Sage. I'm now going to give the locomotive some highlights on that Death Guard green with the Sage. So I'm making sure I'm going from a very high zenith onto the locomotive, so it stops me from hitting the lower areas of the locomotive. And this is really important to sort of maintain that sense of wear on the locomotive. I've masked the locomotive up now so that I can paint the cowcatcher on the front, and I've also masked up the wagons so I can just paint the edge of the flatbed. So the idea is that the cowcatcher and the edge of the flatbed is going to have yellow and black hazard stripes. To do an authentic yellow, which has seen a bit of damage over time, is to start with white, then put a bit of yellow on top. So I've got my trusty white primer. It's going to need just the lightest dusting of this, and then I'm going to use a Tamiya colour. I think it's TS16 or 32, I'll have to check that. Yeah, TS16. Okay, I'm going to just pop a little bit of this yellow on. I'm not going to put it on hard, I'm going to put it on quite light, because the effect I want is a very, very faded yellow. Here we go, you can see the cowcatcher, and that's enough white, and that's enough yellow. Doesn't look very yellow, doesn't need to be any more than that. Okay, now I'm going to do the same on the wagons. Tiny bit of white. Tiny bit of yellow. We've got the yellow on. I've masked this now. I think you can see. I put some Tamiya 6mm tape, this one, on the cowcatcher, so it's ready to go. And on the wagons, ran out of the standard masking tape, so we've got our super sharp blue tape here. I could have done this with the Tamiya 6mm tape, but time. So this is a lot quicker, doesn't look as good, it doesn't look as detailed, but in actual fact, when you see it in the context of the table, it's going to look fine. So now I've loaded the airbrush with some Citadel, here it is, Abaddon Black again, and now I'm going to spray the black onto here. What I'm going to do, as per the yellow, is I'm not going to give it a super good, accurate, full coat. I'm going to give it quite a light coat. What it's going to mean is that the black is going to end up looking quite faded. And that's the kind of effect we want. And I'm going to spray from above, like this. Hopefully you can see what's going on. So same with the wagons, okay? Just going to hit it with a bit of black. Doesn't even have to be that well done. Okay, so I've let everything dry overnight. Now it's time to take the masking off and see what we're left with. So here we go. This is kind of the fun part, the big reveal. Remember, we put that dark grey in the middle. The reason I wanted to do that was because I knew that the dark grey would offset nicely against the yellow and black. And you can see here where we've got some really faded areas of the yellow where we didn't spray it very strong. and this is great because it's going to show a truly sort of beaten up, aged look. And because we've got the chip coat under here, as we wipe that off, we're then going to see the damage coming through on the edges. Okay, so it's going to make it look quite nice and realistic. So we've got the decals on now. We've got a serial number. We've got our inspection decal on the wagons. So we've got those stacked up there. Last thing I want to do, just to give this a bit of character, is put a name on the locomotive. So let's just go for it with a paint pen. So the driver's painted this on himself, so it doesn't have to be so neat. Okay, bit of graffiti on the side of the train, just to give it a bit of character. Last thing to do now is seal up the decals with a little bit of matte spray. Okay, as long as you mix it properly, this Army Painter matte varnish does the job very well. It tends to come out very, very matte, but you really have to shake the can and make sure it's mixed. So I'm just going to touch the areas where the decals are. I don't want to spray the whole model. The reason I don't want to spray the whole model is because right now there's a luster on the engineering areas. It's not fully matte, whereas the painted areas where we put the green on, they are matte, and I want to keep that that difference of reflectiveness and matte. Let's just quickly seal the wagons. We're all done. Okay, let's have a look at what this looks like in situ. Okay, so here it is on some rails. Now we can see how all those painting effects we've done have come together. So I'm pretty happy with that. Now I did paint this quite quickly, but the reason I painted it quickly is because, as you can see in the background, I've still got all this to paint for my demonstration game. So I'm going to have to paint that quickly too. But today, I'm super happy with how this locomotive turned out. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe. If you've got any questions, feel free to pop them in the comments below. And I'm looking forward to showing you how I'm going to paint the rest of this terrain in some future videos.